Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Scott Kaiser, and I'm a program specialist with Student Services. Along with us, we have Jeremy Combs. You want to?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jeremy Combs. I'm also a program development specialist supporting the TUPE grant for Twin Rivers.
And so, what Jeremy and I do is, on a day-to-day basis, we provide services to youth surrounding tobacco use, prevention, and we also touch on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs as well. So it's not just tobacco that we're focusing on, but it is how we're grant funded. So today we wanted to discuss some things with you as parents, how to identify just vaping in general, and we'll talk a little bit about alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, but really about the harm and effects. We want to build the capacity in your prevention, identification, and intervention, as well as resources that we have in our district and what we're doing as a district to mitigate the youth substance use in general. And lastly, we will have an open forum at the end for questions and answers that you have for yourself or your families to better support your students or your children. We would ask if you would like to put questions in the chat box and hold those questions until the end, or you can put them in the chat box now, but we will address those at the end. So in general, the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Grant, like Jeremy said, it funds both Jeremy and I's position under Prop 56 and 99, which are tobacco taxes. And what these the taxes are, they're allocated or distributed to schools, districts, county office of educations to really mitigate and prevent youth tobacco use in general on campus, and as well as try and address harmful drugs such as alcohol and drugs and other medication prescriptions that they should not be taking. So first, Mr. Edilberto or Mr. Soto is going to be putting up a poll question or a couple questions, and I want you guys to answer them. Think about those and answer them if you can. At what age do you think youth began experimenting with alcohol, tobacco, and drugs? And then what are the main reasons that youth experiment with alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs? So if you can, go ahead and utilize this poll system and select what you believe for question 1 and 2, and we'll kind of go over it.
Right now, Jeremy and Scott, we're about almost pretty much with the survey. So I'm gonna close it right now.
So would you like me to end polling, Edilberto? All right, so it looks like a majority said 10 to 11, and obviously 12 to 14 for the age that youth start experimenting. It actually is 12 to 14. So on average, youth begin with tobacco and alcohol at age 12. They start experimenting, tasting, and that's about the age when they start peer pressure, other things like that kind of come into play too. But they get curious, and then obviously they do start experimenting with that then. The main reasons that youth experiment, actually these are the top 3: anxiety, stress, and boredom. But a lot of kids nowadays are going to coping mechanisms or coping methods to utilize marijuana or vaping based on anxiety. They're having major anxiety, and that could be just in life in general or the stressors in general, which lead to the anxiety. So a lot of kids are going that way, and we'll kind of go over other factors that are involved as well. So like I said, the top 3 are anxiety, stress, and boredom, but a lot of other factors that play into it is curiosity. Kids are very curious. They're developing, they're learning. They're also learning from peers, whether it be positive or negative. And so they get very curious to see what it tastes like, what it feels like, kind of those things as far as alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. Peer pressure is a big one that plays into factor, especially in school or out of school. Another is the modeling parent behavior. So kids, if they see it at home, not saying that it is going on at home with any of you, but if they see it at home or if they see family members doing that, close, not in immediate family, but even uncles, aunts, cousins that especially are older, they might model that same behavior, okay? And then also they want to do it to feel grown up or to feel cool. Another question that I would like you guys to do is enter in the chat if you could. How can we as parents prevent our children from experimenting with these things, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs? So we'll go ahead and give you a minute to answer this question. And then we'll do that in the chat, which is located in the very bottom of your screen. And Edberto, at the end of the minute, would you mind just kind of reading off some of those chat responses?
Yes. One of them mentioned as far as it being open communication between parents and kids. That was from Ms. Burgess. Somebody mentioned to educate them as well.
Very good. Very good. So communication, I think, is the most important factor. Talking with your children, just to find out how their day is going. Talking about their friends. Basically, anything going on that we should be concerned about. Keeping them involved in activities and sports. That's a good way to keep kids active and healthy, and to decrease boredom and curiosity. It keeps them straight line and focused. Being involved in their lives, setting rules and enforcing them, giving responsibilities to students. They need value in life. So if they feel like they don't have value or responsibility, they tend to go, to look at other things to do that might be negative. Offer incentives to remain sober. If you, at the end of the week or end of the month or end of the year, whatever the case is, if you get good grades and if your behavior is good, you can get X, Y, and Z depending on, obviously, finances if you can do so. Being a positive role model, kind of like I said before, if youth see this at home. My dad was an alcoholic, so I saw it all the time. My dad, drank constantly, and the beer was just, nothing but, or in the fridge, it was just nothing but beer. So for me, I was raised with it. So just being, cognizant of that inside your home, and then also with family and friends, ensuring that if there are close family members or friends that are involved with this that may be older, talking to your children about that and how these harm and effects might affect them in the future. Helping your children choose friends wisely. I think that peer pressure plays a huge role in this. So if you are to talk to your children and help them choose their friends or meet their friends, play dates, whatever the case is, and if you identify that these friends might not really be so-called friends, then that might be a discussion with your children. And then also talking about alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and if there's been experiences in the family to where, let's say Johnny, my uncle, went down the wrong path, and he ends up in jail because of, X, Y, and Z. Kind of talking about that example and then what the learning lessons are about that. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy Combs, and he's going to be talking about vaping, regarding teens, kind of what we're seeing in our district, and we'll continue on. Jeremy, go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. So yeah, as Scott mentioned, the TUPE grant, it's tobacco use prevention education, but within that we focus on alcohol, substance abuse. But one of the main trends we've seen in the last few years is with vaping. So over the next few slides, we're going to be discussing vaping at a national level and then at a local level, and then what we've seen. So on this slide right here, the National Institute of Health did a study in 2019, over that past year, we've seen that 17.6% of 8th graders, and then all the way to 12th grade, which is 37.3, have tried vaping or have vaped in the past year. Those numbers are pretty alarming, considering that you see such a great increase from 8th grade to 12th grade, and a lot of the work that we do around prevention education. What we would hope to see is those numbers either kind of decline or level out, because what this shows you is that as students progress through high school, obviously, as Scott mentioned, peer pressure is a factor. The marketing of these companies is a factor. Also, just the not understanding the dangers associated with vaping is another factor that could cause an increase in vaping. So the work that we do is around education, letting them know the harmful effects with vaping, and then obviously prevention, putting programs in place before they try so they understand what those dangers are. And then for those who are using, providing intervention for them, giving them resources and opportunities to quit vaping. Next slide, please. So as Scott mentioned, we do a lot of tracking locally in our district through a survey called the California Healthy Kids Survey. Now this survey not only looks at tobacco use and other drugs, it looks at school climate and safety, but specific to what we're looking at through our grant, what we wanted to look at is tobacco use and the perception of tobacco use in vaping. So if you look at this first graphic here, it's the survey results from this past year about the perceived harm of using vape products. What that means, perceived harm, is do you feel that using vaping products are harmful? And I'll give you an example here. We can look at the used vape products occasionally and see that in 7th grade, 30% see a great perception of harm, whereas in 8th grade, 28% see a great perception. Although those numbers are high, and that's good, I mean, a third of the students see that it's great. What's more alarming to us, if you look below where it says none, that says 37% of 7th and 8th graders see no perceived harm of using vape products, which means they don't see it as a danger. And that's just occasionally. When you're looking at several times a day, you see that 37 and 38% of those students also do not see perceived harm in using those vape products several times a day. So, the work that we do, we take this data and we say, okay, so what can we do now that we have this information to help educate youth, to help prevent youth from using, and help provide them with the knowledge they need to know regarding the health effects of vaping. Next slide, please. Yeah. So similarly with 9th through 12th grade, although the numbers are a little bit more balanced here, we still see that 25 to 30% of 9th through 12th graders also do not see perceived harm in using vape products. So once again, that comes into the realm of education and programs that we put in place through our grant to lower that percentage. And hopefully what we're going to see in the next few years when we do these surveys in the future is that, great and moderate becomes a little bit higher, which shows us that the education, the programs that we're providing is giving them the information they need to make a better decision. And this, so I see what year is the survey from? This is actually this past school year. So all this information we just used recently. So we did the survey in the fall. So these are the results from that survey. Next slide, please. So, okay, so more data. We kind of wanted to give you a little perspective on the impact that the TUPE grant has. So as you can see, in our first year, 2014 and 15 that we have, that is the year we did not have the TUPE grant. And as you can see, if you look at the right-hand side under total, we have 458 substance abuse infractions, which is our highest mark, because what happened is that following year, we received the TUPE grant. And as you can see, through the interventions that we provide, through prevention programs and just education overall, those numbers overall do start to trend downward. However, what we noticed in 2018-19 is that you can see tobacco and electronic cigarette use went up from the previous year from 27 to 56. And you could see that downward downward trend up until that year. So, you know, that alarmed us. Okay, so what trends are happening? What's going on? And a lot of the information, you know, around vaping, and we understand that this is causing now an uptick. You know, before cigarette use, we saw a downward trend with cigarette use. I mean, through ad campaigns, through just, I think, education. So you can see that that's starting to decrease. But now, as one decreases, unfortunately, the way it works is there's something else, a trend that increases, and so we have to stay on top of that and be vigilant to address this. So what we're seeing is the reason for that increase is due to vaping. Next slide, please. So we're going to watch about a 2-minute video that describes a little bit more in depth the harmful effects of vaping. So about 2 minutes, and then we're going to move on to a little bit more about that.
Vaping is inhaling a vapor created by an electronic cigarette or some other device. Initially, vaping was intended to be a substitute for cigarette smoking. However, we found over time that vaping products have been altered so that you can inhale other substances, such as marijuana products, CBD oil, and other things that kids want to and adults want to inhale. We find that, you know, people who vape have something called popcorn lung or bronchiolitis obliterans, where the small little airways at the end of their lungs are getting inflamed. What we're also finding is that if you buy adulterated products that are not sold in a store but from the street vendor, or you're trying to alter either the vaping device or the vaping cartridge, that you expose yourself to having other contaminants put in, like some chemicals like diacetylene, nickel, and other oils that somehow don't get burned off in the process. And these pose another risk to you in terms of developing inflammation in your lungs, which can lead to either having a breathing tube put in some cases needing cardiopulmonary bypass or ECMO support to actually stay alive. And, you know, these are happening in kids, you know, people in their 20s who have their whole lives ahead of them. And once you have this, your lungs are never the same, and you're never the same, being put on a machine to keep you alive for so long. So these are real dangers, and we're kind of seeing the dangers of vaping coming up front as opposed to the dangers of cigarette smoking, which have later on in your life. If you are vaping and you notice that you are short of breath, you just don't feel like yourself, you're feeling dizzy, you're feeling winded, you really should see a medical professional, you know, and be evaluated. If you can catch it early, you may be able to prevent some of the inflammation before it spreads elsewhere.
RWJ Barnabas Health. Let's be healthy together.
Thank you. So there's a few things I wanted to point out in that video. First, he described the effects of vaping that happen with vaping products that are not altered. And then he went in to talk about more about cells and like the black market street vendors, and then the more harmful effects of those. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the impacts of each. So one thing he mentioned is with typical vaping, one of the effects of that is a disease called popcorn lung, which the scientific term is bronchiolitis obliterans. And actually the reason they call it popcorn lung is because of the chemical used, diacetyl. It was actually used in the production of microwave popcorn earlier, I believe it was about 20 years ago. And what they noticed is a lot of the workers in the factories were getting sick from this chemical diacetyl, and then were having lung issues. So obviously that has been removed from microwave popcorn now, but that chemical is still being used in other products, like with vaping products. So that's the chemical that causes popcorn lung, which is the scarring of the tiny air sacs, results in the thickening and the narrowing of the airways. While it sounds like an innocent term, popcorn lung, it is a serious lung disease. It can cause coughing, wheezing, and shortness of breath. A lot of those symptoms that are similar to COPD. And as you can see on the right-hand side, that is the lung affected by popcorn lung. See how the airway is restricted, and on the left, that would be a normal airway. Okay, next slide, please. So a lot of you are probably wondering in this time about the impacts of COVID-19 when it comes to vaping and tobacco use. So obviously, COVID-19 itself is very new as far as the studies have done with the virus. But one thing is for certain, since it does impact the lungs, anything that causes damage to the lungs, such as smoking tobacco, marijuana, any of those types of products that damages the lungs or harm the immune system, the increase for infection of COVID-19 is more severe, which means the symptoms that you face if you already have lung issues from smoking or vaping is going to only be increased. Obviously, the less you use those products, the infection could be less severe, but that doesn't take into account other potential health factors that you may have individually. But overall, we do know that if you do smoke or vape, it does weaken the lungs and therefore causes a greater infection to the immune system. But studies are still coming out on that. They're actually going to, I actually just watched a webinar recently from Stanford Medicine saying that they do see a negative impact between the two, but data may not be available for another 6 months to a year. Okay, so the next slide are some of the newer devices that we see students use. So as we know, use evolves. What started out as the first generation of electronic cigarettes looked a lot more like an actual cigarette, to whereas some of the pictures now you see are more of the third generation devices, which are called mods. They're on the top left-hand side there. They're typically larger in shape and size, and they deliver more nicotine than the earlier generations did or do. They have a larger battery capacity, and they include modification options. But we're actually seeing less of those being used, and students now moving to more of the Juuls, which are more on the right-hand side here. As you can see, they resemble a USB flash drive, so they're easy to conceal in classrooms and at home. They're available in several flavors, so we know that one of the main attractions for teens are the different types of flavors that vaping offers. However, we do know that most recently, FDA has placed bans on a lot of the flavors of cigarettes, specifically in Juul. So even though Juul, as of last year, was the new trend, we're already seeing an uptick of a new trend of disposable vapes. Some of those are called puff bars. So what happens is the FDA places this ban, but these tobacco companies, they'll find loopholes for new products to emerge. And teens, as you know, are very quick to jump on those new trends. And these businesses and tobacco industry is really good about marketing these to teens, unfortunately. So as one thing tends to subside, the new trend, the new fad of this type of use increases. So what we're seeing now are those disposable vapes like Puff Bar being used. They look very similar. They're longer and rectangular, but after one-time use, they're typically disposed. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the video, they talked about black market sales. So one thing I wanted to mention about that is the difference between vaping products that were approved vaping products and products that were altered or or purchased to the black market. They can be purchased illegally through online or in person. They can be through dealers, family members, friends. So a lot of those devices that are altered are associated with a disease that they're recently calling a VALI, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. So a VALI is typically caused, what they're finding through studies, through something called vitamin E acetate, which this is something that's used as a thickening agent in the pods to dilute the THC oil or vape oil in those cartridges that allow it to go further. So it makes it last longer. But what they're seeing is the negative impact of vitamin E acetate is causing this VALI, which you've probably seen in recent news reports and studies that are leading to extremely severe lung injuries or even death in some cases. Once again, this is relatively new, so the studies are still ongoing, but what they're finding is a correlation between the vitamin E acetate and then other harmful chemicals as well that's causing this reaction. So I just wanted to I think it's important to distinguish, although vaping is extremely harmful, what we really be mindful of and being aware of is those black market, those altered products that we're seeing that could be even more dangerous. So as we talked about before, identification and attraction, as you saw from the previous slide, a lot of those devices are obviously easy to conceal or detect. They look like flash drives you put in your computer. You know, they're actually charging when they're in the computer, so you wouldn't even know that from the difference between that and a flash drive. It's easier to conceal in school, at home. Also, vaping typically doesn't have like clouds of smoke or smells associated with it, like cigarette smoking, where you know it's a very defined smell. If you go outside and smoke a cigarette and come back in, you can smell it on a person. Whereas with vaping, it's a vapor, so it tends to dissipate and doesn't really stick to clothing as much. And as we've seen, students can place them in their sleeve and their hoodie string, and they can vape in the classroom undetected. So we know that it's easier to conceal, and that's attractive to teens. Another thing that's not mentioned here, but I'd like to mention is the flavorings that are attractive to teens. Watermelon, blue raspberry, you know, although tobacco companies claim it's not marketing to teens, we know that it's very intentional on who they're trying to attract in those ads and those flavors. And I believe with that, I'd like to pass it back to Scott.
Yeah, and some other great job, Jeremy. Some other concerns that that we should be on the lookout as parents, as kids become curious and they tend to look at things that they have in the household, and some kids are going to hand sanitizer and drinking that because it does have alcohol, a smaller concentration of alcohol, but some kids are doing that. Some kids are smoking, drinking, or ingesting nutmeg or potpourri because it does give them a kind of a high. I'm sure you guys have heard bath salts. A lot of times in Florida, we saw this with people smoking or inhaling bath salts, and it kind of turned them into like monsters to where they were actually chewing people's faces and actually killing them, kind of like zombie-esque. Another one is lean. It's very popular in the rap culture. A lot of rappers talk about lean, and it's cough syrup, soda, and a Jolly Rancher. And sometimes kids will mix in pills in there too. So it's very lean can cause seizures. Lil Wayne is you can find out about Lil Wayne. He's a very popular rapper in this generation. He even talks about it, which in his songs kind of glorifying it. But then after all of his seizures that he had due to lean, he kind of came out with it and said, hey, you know, youth, don't do this. I had multiple seizures, almost passed away. So be very, very careful because all those are they're very common household items. Cough syrup, we would never think that kids would try and mix that with soda, Jolly Rancher, and potentially other pills too, but that they do. We've had a couple cases in Twin Rivers where they did as well. Vaping, obviously, Jeremy talked about marijuana, tobacco, nicotine, and sometimes alcohol. And the thing with alcohol is if youth are vaping, or people in general are vaping alcohol, it goes directly to their brain and can cause blood clots, and then obviously death. So that's something to look out for as well. Marijuana edibles is a huge, it's big on the rise. They can put marijuana now into desserts, candy, Cheetos, pastries, donuts, Rice Krispies. It's out there. Kids, we've had multiple kids go to the ER at school because they were kind of overdosing on marijuana based on not knowing how much is in a concentration of a type of food. They might feel that a Rice Krispie treat, a small one, doesn't have a lot of THC, but the makers can put as much THC in as they want, and that's not regulated, obviously, either. With all vaping, so tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, legally, the legal age now is 21, in case you haven't heard, but everything is 21 and older now. So some of the TUPE services that we're offering our youth to mitigate and obviously prevent alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. With prevention, we have curriculum in 6th through 9th grade that discusses tobacco, vaping. In 7th and 8th grade, it's an overall drug prevention curriculum that 7th and 8th graders receive, all of them. And then in 9th grade, another refresher of vaping because it increases in the high school age. So we want to try and prevent that in the ninth grade, so the rest of their school years, obviously, it's mitigated. Um, Another prevention effort that we have is youth development. So peer-to-peer outreach. We do a lot of activities or events focusing on alcohol, tobacco, and drugs during Red Ribbon Week, which is in October. So it's October 23rd to 31st, and it's a national celebration that we do at all schools, and especially in our district, that they discuss these harm and effects. They provide information about alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, which is very helpful. Um, we also have mentoring programs, which is a one-on-one for students that have issues with alcohol, tobacco, or drugs, or are experimenting, so we can provide better support. And obviously, those students can then refer those students to us as intervention specialists too. So for intervention, we have intervention counseling, which is one-on-one or in groups with kids that have been identified at school by their peers, by counselors, by administrators, that they could utilize some support in the counseling. And what that looks like is it's 3 one-on-one sessions with the youth, and the last one includes a parent involvement. So let's say that tomorrow I was caught on campus with marijuana, with alcohol, tobacco, pills. Obviously, they would be contacting the parents. The school would be contacting parents. Administrators would contact us or a counselor at the school, and we would provide intervention the following returning from school, if it was a suspension or not. And administrators can utilize this in lieu of suspension. So instead of suspending, if the student was to complete the intervention program, they would not be suspended. So that's up to the administrator. They still have the option to suspend or not. But we're trying to go more restorative to keep the kids in school safe, and then also to learn, and especially learn from alcohol, tobacco, and drug use. And lastly, with cessation, if we after following the intervention, we provide cessation efforts with the California Smokers Helpline, and that's strictly with vaping and smoking, and chewing tobacco, obviously, as well. But if kids would like to stop, we give them those services. There's a text app where kids can text in to get resources, talk with a professional counselor surrounding how to quit. They can also call in to get more support. So those resources are provided online, and they are free. And then anybody can always reach out to us with student services for more details if needed. And that really concludes the presentation. And I know there's already some questions that were previously discussed in the chat. So Adalberto, would you mind just putting or just talking about some of the questions that we can answer for the families?
Yeah, one of the questions that was asked in the Google form was how does TUPE, or a lot of the services are being used or implemented by TUPE, look during this time with COVID-19?
Yeah, so thank you, Adalberto. So right now, with schools, if they before COVID happened, before schools went to distance learning, some schools did offer the curriculum, the prevention curriculum, drug prevention or tobacco or vaping curriculum. If they did not, we safeguarded that by putting out it's called the Stanford Toolkit. It was completed and made by Stanford Medicine, which is a very reputable source. And the Stanford Toolkit is what we put on Student Services website to go out to all the families for parents to actually look on prevention efforts surrounding alcohol or tobacco for vaping and marijuana. So that is a resource that we put up there on Student Services on our website. So any parent can go on there. I know that Adalberto put a Student Services kind of resource list, and that was on there. So hopefully you guys all received that as families or parents of the district. And if you guys have any questions about that, feel free to include that in the chat and how to kind of utilize that resource. But it is free. It's very, very easy to kind of navigate. And it does discuss a lot about some of the stuff that Jeremy and I talked about in this presentation, and goes into more detail about marketing and how parents, how you can identify as well as far as youth basically using. Next question, Roberto.
One of the other questions I was asked was as far as like families, like symptoms for people that are vaping. What are some signs that are clear cut? I, I know that, for example, you mentioned that within your some of the programs that you do with the students, but what would you say for families that are looking like at home? What could they do as far as being proactive when it comes to vaping or other substances?
Yeah, I think the first thing is with identification or identifying if your child is using. Number one, if they're acting different, if they're trying to hide things or conceal things, they physically they might look different. If it's something that's harder, like marijuana, it could be alcohol. They can be more lethargic. Their motions and moods can change very easily. And obviously, with teens, that might just be typical puberty. But in general, you can definitely see a difference in their friends, them glorifying or writing certain marijuana signs, alcohol signs. Cookies, and FYI, Cookies is a brand that a lot of youth um, actually glorify. It's glorified marketing, but Cookies is basically a marijuana-based company that cookies like edibles. Uh, they utilize marijuana inside the edibles. So cookies, I've seen a lot of kids wearing sweaters that have cookies on it or shirts that say cookies on it, and I would alert the administrator and say, hey, I just want to let you know, I met with Johnny and he has a sweater on that glorifies this. A lot of people don't know about it. They just see cookies as, okay, well, it's just a cookie, but it's not. It's actually talking about marijuana. So just in general, your child the best. If they're acting differently, I would just approach them and ask them, hey, something's odd or something's different. Is there something we want to talk about, or is there something that I can help you with? And if so, if you identified that, utilize us as resources in the district. Contact student services. Feel free to ask for Jeremy and I. We can definitely support your youth, or even friends of your children as well. They can always refer anonymously, saying, "Hey, I have a friend named Johnny who needs help with this. We'll find out what school it's at, and then go support that child." And Roberto, next question.
This is more my question is like, are there any upcoming trends, any other substance abuse besides vaping that are coming up? Anything that you see trending or is being used by teens?
Yeah, this slide we discussed that a little bit about what kids are doing. And lean is typically one that's hard to detect because also it looks like soda, right? So kids can bring it in a plastic bottle to school, and we've actually found that a number of times, and they're drinking that and getting sick. So that would be something that I would definitely look at. Marijuana is hugely on the rise because of it's harder to conceal too. Whether it's edible foods, desserts, candy, stuff like that we would not be able to know or detect. Um, and vaping in general, just typical nicotine tobacco is is on the rise as well, as you can see in our data with our district. Um, so just being on the lookout with your children, just if they're acting differently. Other signs that you can tell if they're just with marijuana is they'll tend to have bloodshot eyes, very slow reaction, always hungry. Teens are typically always hungry because we're growing, but following a marijuana use, about a half hour after, kids will get like that bloodshot eyes, very lethargic, very slow. Their motor skills are very, like very spotty and slow. And then also they're very hungry and they want to eat. So those are things that are definitely on the rise, and it's something to be on the lookout. If you have stuff at home, just thinking about that now, if you have, alcohol readily available or your pills readily available, you might want to utilize a lockbox or something like that, or keep them concealed, or a safe place where your youth cannot get to them, just to be safe in general. But thank you for that question, Roberto. Anything else?
One of the last questions about the Healthy Kids survey. How does that look like? How many kids respond? What are some of the, you mentioned some of the data when it came to vaping and controlled substances, but who responds to surveys? I think they're just asking a bit more information about that.
Okay, got it. So with the California Healthy Kids Survey, this year and years prior, we did 7th through 12th grade. So every student, 7th through 12th grade, we tried to hit. So our target goal was at least 85% of students and staff that took the survey. One is the California School Staff Survey, which is the staff survey, which talks about, kind of like Jeremy said, also school climate, safety, stuff on campus that they feel support with youth, all that. Do they feel like they're supported by administration? Do they feel it's a safe school? Does the school follow rules? Kind of those things. But with the student survey, like I said, all 7th through 12th graders take it. We typically offer it between October and December of each year, and these are all anonymous results. So there is no tracking on a certain student, but based on all this data, so this is a percentage of overall. This is all 7th graders. So not just one school. This is the population of all 7th graders, the population of all 8th graders, and so forth, with 9th through 12th as well. So each year following the survey in December, we'll get the results back in about February or March. And then Jeremy and myself, as well as the assessment team, we look at the data to kind of look at trends, look at anything that's alarming, and provide certain supports. We can also see this data per school site as well. So we look at the data per school site, and we look at the data globally in our district to see, is there anything, okay, well, this school has a huge increase of vaping, or this school has a major decrease in perception of harm, kind of like Jeremy said. There was only 37% of students, or 37% of students felt there is no harm. So obviously it was way different. Last year was at 50%. So at least 50% of students felt there was harm. So those are the things that we look at in the Healthy Kids Survey.
Yeah, and then additionally too, starting next year, we're actually going to be surveying 6th graders as well. So we want to try to, get the information and feedback from them so we know how to address it earlier, in hopes that, we can start to impact them as well at an earlier age.
Correct. Anything else, Edberto?
One question pretty much goes into what are the plans for TUPE going into the summer, and then also in some ways, how does TUPE look like when we come back into the school year for 2020-2021?
Perfect. Well, so Jeremy and I just wrote a grant to extend TUPE services. So we got more money in. We will be doing a lot more, purchasing a lot more supplies, getting ready for the new school year. In addition, I wrote another grant to work with a specified population, which was our disparate population, and it's called the Disparities Grant. And we looked at youth in our district to find out what populations are more at risk, or what populations are using more. And it turns out that African Americans, Hispanic, Latino, and even Caucasian are the highest disparate populations in our district that are using. So on average, a lot of those infractions are more of those populations. So we wrote a grant to work with those youth, and we really focused on an area of Foothill Farms area, which was the highest infraction base out of our whole district. So we're working at Foothill High School and then Foothill Ranch Middle School, because those are the two highest infraction use based. So we have partners that are working with those schools, and we will continue doing that next year. We have a lot of with the youth development that I talked about earlier. It's called Club Live and Friday Night Live. Club Live is at middle school, and Friday Night Live is at high school. And those are the youth that get together with adults on campus, whether it's a counselor, a teacher, administrator, and they work to mitigate, they educate and mitigate stuff on campus surrounding alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. So we're going to continue focusing on those areas. Additionally, with this new grant, we are partnering with Health Education Council to work with parents. Kind of similar work that Jeremy and I are doing right now in this presentation, but really focusing, much in a much more in-depth light of working with, let's say it's at Rio Linda High School, going over to Rio Linda High School and working with a group of parents that have the same issues or needs to support their children. So we will be doing that in the future as well. Like I said, Jeremy and I will be purchasing a lot of supplies before the summer's end to really pump all these prevention efforts out in the following school year. If we go back to distance learning, we're going to have to adapt our ways and really focus on how do we get all this out to the families through that kind of platform. So that's kind of something that Jeremy and I will be doing over the summer too, to find out, are we reopening? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be half distance learning, half at school, half students in one day, half students another day? And then we will adapt to that and then make sure that the kids are receiving the prevention efforts and all these other activities that we're doing to mitigate this in general.
And then along the work with the Friday Night Live and Club Live, they actually have went virtual and still meet with their advisors and are looking to still impact in the community in some way, through public service announcements and different things like that. So if this does continue into the fall, we'll be looking at more opportunities to how we can expand that virtual connection between students.
And then, Scott, can you go to the last slide with your contact information?
Got it.
So I see that those are pretty much all the questions that we have. What I guess we'll have our closing thoughts. I already shared with them the contact information for you both, but I guess at this point, I guess closing thoughts, and we'll be finishing with our webinar for today.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to Jeremy or myself through email or via phone. Obviously, we're not in the office right now, so it might be tougher to call our extension, but in the future, if things reopen, obviously we will be there. Right now, probably the best way to contact us is through email. So if you have any questions, concerns, or need support with your child or other children that you guys may know of, feel free to contact us, and we'll steer you in the right direction or support you as best as we can in a remote setting. Jeremy and I are also doing counseling sessions via Zoom, kind of like we're doing here, but actually one-on-one sessions as well for students that might need help. So if you feel like you would like to utilize that resource, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll support as much as we can.
And with that, so yes, I have to say, thank you very much for Scott and Jeremy today, for being here today and just sharing a lot of the work that they're doing and in some ways expanding the TUPE program for the next 2-3 years. We appreciate you being here today. We appreciate many of the families and community partners that are here as well within the webinar. We'll share this information to you all via email and the video as well. Thank you, Mr. Barajas, as always, for our Spanish interpreter. With that, we'll be finishing up, and we thank you very much for being here today. So thank you and take care and have a good day.
Thank you all.
Yes, take care.